Right, so water clarity, big topic. People always chasing it. We always want that crystal clear water, which helps our fish pop, our scapes stand out. So I've got a secret weapon for it. If it's something that you're struggling with, stay locked into the video and I'll show you exactly what I'm using to get a good crystal clear water. Right, so stick with me on this one because a lot of people's heads melt whenever you say the word chemical filtration with fish tanks. But it really isn't something to be afraid of. For some reason, the word intimidates people, and I think it's because it gives off the impression that we're adding chemicals into the water that fish shouldn't be taking in, whereas a lot of the times that's not the case. These are resins, these are stuff that strip things from the water column. What it's about is it's knowing how and when to use it and exactly what it's doing to your tank. So if you understand that side of things, then you can really use it to your benefit and get some really good results out of it. So there's various things you can use it for: odor removals, water clarity, nutrient export. But I've got a secret weapon on my tank, which I've used on all of my tank setups, whether that be marine, planted, African cichlids. And I've always had really good results out of it, and I've never had any negative effects. And it really helps with the water clarity as well. So I'll show you the bit of kit that I'm talking about. I'll tell you when's a good time to use this, when's a bad time to use this, and when you need to sort of moderately use it as well. And then you can learn a bit from it and then potentially even implement this onto your system. And then I'll show you how you can do it on different types of systems as well. So not everybody's got a sump, but there's ways you can do it with your canister filter, your in-tank filtration. So stick around, let's take a look at what I've got. Right, so this is the secret weapon, and what this is called is a carbon reactor. So it is a big tube and it's filled with activated carbon media. I have it running off the return line, so it doesn't require any additional pumps or electric to run it, and it just runs off the return pump. I can use this little handle here to control the flow rate that's going through it, switch it off completely if I need to. But I've carried this over from a marine tank because it was so effective at clearing up the water in that system. And I carried it onto this one, and it's had the same sort of effect. I get really crystal clear water in this tank. So it's constantly running. I have it on all the time. I never switch it off. There's certain setups where you don't want to do that. But with African cichlids, we can without having negative effects on the tank. And we'll go into that a little bit later. But it's just filled to the brim with activated carbon. And it's just so effective at what it does.
That's why it's the GOAT! The GOAT!
So we'll talk a little bit about activated carbon, why it's so good, why you should use it, especially on African cichlid tanks. And then times where you just need to be a little bit careful with what you're doing. So don't stress if you haven't got a sump, because there's loads of effective ways that you can implement carbon onto your system. So the main one is most people will just get these little media bags. They'll fill them up with activated carbon and then just chuck them in the canister filter. So you can just chuck it in a section under your filter floss or under your biological media, and then it's getting a constant flow of water that's going through it. It's not recycling the water that's going over it as well. And that can be really effective and really easy to change out as well, because you do need to change carbon media because it gets saturated. So it can be a little bit expensive because you have to change it, I'd say, every sort of run it 3 months maximum before you change it. Because if it gets saturated, what it can start doing is leaching harmful substances back into the aquarium. So if you're going to use it, you do need to manage it well. But these make it really easy to change out or change out for another one, or take out if you need to, if you feel like it's been overused. Another good way of doing it is with a canister filter. You can chuck these in your in-tank filters as well. You just get smaller bags and chuck them in there with all your other media. But another good way to do it with a canister filter is you can get these, like, they're basically like little mini reactors like this one. So they're sold often as extra polishers, what you plug into the return line on your canister filter, and sometimes they're filled up with sponges to give you an extra polishing effect on the water. But you can fill that up with carbon media and it acts exactly the same as a reactor, where it's just getting a constant flow through it. You're not recycling the water over the top of it. It's not just sat there stagnant. And that, to me, is probably the best way you can do it if you're doing it from a canister filter. But these do the trick just fine. You can use these and get the same sort of effect from it anyway. So the secret to activated carbon is the way it's made up. So it's very porous. It's got thousands of these little tiny pores in each granule, which pull things from your water column. So nasty things like, nasty chemicals, some organic compounds, tannins in the water, they all get captured in these little pores. And that's why it's so good at stripping things from your water column and giving you good water clarity. So things like tannins in your water, if you've just put bogwood in your water and you get that tea coloured, some people like it, some people want it in the tank and have that black water effect, in which case you don't want to use carbon. But if you want to get rid of that, you see it in tanks and older tanks and sometimes in fish shops, they've just got that yellowy tinge to the water. And I've had it in my tanks previously before. If you use carbon, it strips all that yellow tint and those like off-coloured shades from your water column and gives you really good water clarity. You can really see it when you're using a lot of white light over your tank. So it does a really good job of that. It's also a little bit of an insurance policy as well. So if you've got, in your house, you're going to have, if your missus is lighting candles or she's spraying deodorant and perfume and stuff like that, these things get airborne, they can get into your water column, and your carbon media will strip those things from your water column and give you some sort of sense of comfort. So they can, they build up in your tank, they can have negative effects on your fish's health without you even knowing they're invisible. So if you're running carbon, it gives you a little bit of a peace of mind, knowing that those things, if they are in the air and they are getting into the water, are potentially getting stripped from it. So that's why it's important that you change this stuff out, because of the pores. When those pores get full, that's when things can start leaching back out into the aquarium. So as long as you maintain it and you change it every sort of 3 months, then you should be fine. You should have a good ride with it and you should see some really good impact on your aquarium, especially with the water clarity. Right, let's talk about the don'ts. So this isn't a miracle cure for everything. And I will make this clear. This is using carbon and running carbon is not an excuse to not do water changes. You still need to do them. This stuff isn't going to remove ammonia, nitrates from your water column. It just doesn't do that. So don't think it's a shortcut where you can just put off doing water changes and not do them. It's not going to have that effect where it's going to clear those things from your tank. It will clear, pollutants and tannins and things like that, but still do your water changes. There is no shortcut for it. Unless you've got plants, you really need to be on top of your water changes. Plants are a little bit different. They will absorb nitrates and use them as food, but with an African cichlid tank, this isn't a shortcut for it, so don't do it. Another time you don't want to run carbon you want to make, if you're using it, you want to make sure you take it out your system or switch your reactor off, is if you are medicating your fish. So carbon is so good at stripping things from the water column that if you're adding medication into your fish tank and you leave your carbon running, it's going to absorb all the medication from your water column, and it's not going to have the desired effect and make your fish better. So if you are medicating the fish, make sure you turn your carbon off, or at least take the bags out of your canister filter, or however you're implementing it. It needs to come out. A good time to use it is when you're finishing a medication cycle and you want to get rid of all the medication residue which may be lingering around in your water column. Then it's a good time to use it, but not while you're actively treating the fish. Another one is if you've got a heavily planted tank. So you want to be really careful with this and really know what your water parameters are before you start introducing carbon onto a planted setup. Now, I have run the carbon media on a full planted tank, and I didn't have any negative effects with plant growth. But I wouldn't advise that you do it. I still had a lot of growth in that tank even though I was running the carbon, but I set that tank up from the get-go with the carbon, the activated carbon running on the system. If you were to add it onto it, it could mess up your tank cycle and the nutrients and how the plants are feeling and things. So be careful with it, because it will take some of the essential compounds out of your water column which your plants are using to grow. So if you overdo it, it might stunt your plant growth, or it might cause some of your plants to die because it's absorbing some of the stuff they need. So be really careful if you're using it on a planted tank. What makes it so good with African cichlids is we don't have to worry about plant growth and you know, plants dying in the tank and things like that. So that's why we can run it all the time on African cichlids, because we've just got a tank full of rocks and it doesn't have any negative impact on the fish. So that's the reason I run it all the time on African cichlids. So like I was saying at the beginning of the video, do a bit of research on it, educate yourself a little bit on, look at what sort of tank you're keeping and what sort of outcome you want from it before you start using chemical filtration. With carbon media, like, it's not as aggressive, but you still want to be mindful of when you're using it depending on what sort of tank you're keeping, if you're putting medication in. Ideally, you don't want to run it 24/7 like I do. You only really want to run it when you need to. So if you notice your water clarity is getting off, or you think there might be some sort of pollutants in the air that may be polluting your tank, even sort of dechlorination of your water. If you have a good carbon media setup, then it can take the chlorine out of your tap water when you're doing water changes as well. I always use tap safe anyway, just to be safe, because I don't know how long that process takes of the carbon taking the chlorine out of the water, but it's exactly the same stuff that they use in these little Brita filters that you've got. So, you know, the stuff you put your tap water in to make it drinkable, they use activated carbon inside those little cartridges, and that's what strips all the chlorines and chemicals from your tap water. It's so good at what it does if you use it correctly. When it comes to buying activated carbon as well, you really do want to think about what you're buying and what you're putting in too. So I always buy the really fine grains, particles of activated carbon when I put it onto a system. The reason I do that is because I watched a video that was actually on BRS TV. So it's a really good video. You should go and watch it. They do about marine tanks. So I was watching it when I was setting up a marine system. But they use all these different types of activated carbon, and they just give you a visual representation. So they do all these experiments on different types and show you how effective they are. So it really gives you a good bit of evidence, and you can really see how the carbon impacts the clarity of the water and how it absorbs those things from the water column. So if you haven't seen that video, get onto BRS TV. It is about saltwater marine tanks, but it's good education for carbon media, and it gives you a good idea of what you need to go out and buy and how effective it's going to be in your tank as well. So if you're struggling with water clarity, it's something you're chasing, or you just want to improve it that little bit more, think about carbon, activated carbon, implementing it onto your tank. If you've already got it and it's not working, maybe play around with things and see if there's other ways you can add it on, because I've always had really good results from it. If you use anything else that you've had really good results for water clarity, let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure you subscribe.